When you hear the word scalping, what image flashes through your mind? A war-painted warrior? A settler screaming in horror? A brutal frontier battle? We've all seen the Hollywood version. But the truth behind who actually scalped, why they did it, and which native tribes led the way, it is far more shocking than anything you've ever been told. Because what if I told you? Scalping wasn't originally a native invention at all. Let's dive into the untold story of how a single act of violence became a symbol of fear, warfare, and survival on the American frontier, in which tribes wielded it as a weapon of power. Scalping wasn't born in the forests of America. It predates even written history. Archaeological evidence shows that various cultures across Eurasia practiced scalping thousands of years ago. But in the Americas, it was rare and not nearly as widespread as we've been led to believe. Early native tribes in the East, like the Lenape or Powhatan, may have taken scalps as symbolic tokens of victory. Some considered it a way to capture the spiritual power of an enemy. But it wasn't a practice done frequently or for shock value. So what changed? European colonists arrived and brought with them a ruthless economy of death. French, British, and Spanish powers began offering money for Native American scalps. And that changed everything. In the 1600s and 1700s, colonial governments began paying for scalps. At first, it was native scalps rewards for hunters, soldiers, and vigilantes who killed hostile tribes. But the rules got blurry fast. Colonists started scalping back. Sometimes they took the hair of natives, sometimes of rival Europeans, and in more than one case, even their own. One Pennsylvania bounty paid $134 for every native male scalp. Women, $50. Children, just $34. It was genocide, plain and simple, but masked under economics. And the result? Tribes who had never practiced scalping before began adopting it in retaliation. Scalping exploded. It was no longer sacred. It became currency. And warfare would never look the same again. If there was one tribe whose name struck fear into both settlers and soldiers alike, it was the Comanche. They weren't the first to scalp, but they made it infamous. The Comanche weren't just warriors. They were tacticians. Their raids were fast, brutal, and psychological. Scalping became part of that strategy, not just to kill, but to terrify. During the 1700s and 1800s, as the Comanche dominated what is now Texas and northern Mexico, their scalping practices became legendary. They'd strike at dawn, take horses, weapons, and captives, and leave behind bodies without hair. To them, scalping wasn't random. It was power. It was status. And it sent a clear message. Cross into Comanche land, and you won't leave with your life or your scalp. Next come the Apache people, divided into various bands across the Southwest, from Arizona to northern Mexico. Names like Geronimo and Cochise still echo today, but long before them, the Apache were known for their tenacity and surgical brutality. Unlike the Comanche's large-scale raids, the Apache struck like phantoms, quiet, sudden, and final. And yes, they scalped, often. But the Apache didn't always do it to strike fear. Sometimes it was about vengeance. A family killed? That scalp was personal. A village wiped out by Mexican bounty hunters? That scalp was justice. It's no coincidence that Mexico began offering bounties for Apache scalps too. In some areas, an Apache scalp was worth more than gold. And like the Comanche, the Apache adapted to a brutal world. Scalping became part of their identity, not by tradition, but by necessity. Travel north to the Great Lakes, and you find the powerful Iroquois Confederacy Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, and later, the Tuscarora. Here, scalping had ancient roots. The Iroquois practiced it before Europeans arrived, but it wasn't senseless violence. It was ritualistic. The scalp represented victory in battle, spiritual dominance, and sometimes even a replacement for a lost loved one. In the Iroquois mourning wars, warriors would capture enemies to replace deceased relatives, and scalps. They were part of that spiritual math. But once colonists arrived and war escalated, so did the scalping. British and French commanders paid indigenous allies to scalp rival colonists and soldiers. And Iroquois warriors became some of the most effective and feared in that deadly game. Scalping was no longer sacred. It was profit. In the north, the Cheyenne and Sioux also engaged in scalping, but for them, it was closely tied to warrior status. A scalp taken in battle wasn't just a trophy, it was a rite of passage. Some tribes required it before a warrior could marry or lead. But unlike the Comanche or Apache, the Cheyenne and Sioux didn't make scalping their central warfare strategy. They did it selectively after major victories, or to humiliate enemies. One of the most famous instances was the Battle of Little Bighorn, where warriors scalped members of General Custer's defeated cavalry. Some say it was revenge for earlier massacres. Others say it was just war. Either way, the message was clear. No scalp, no honor. Here's something you won't hear in textbooks. White settlers scalped too. A lot. Massachusetts paid for scalps. So did Pennsylvania. French-Canadian militias, American rangers, and even private bounty hunters made entire careers out of hunting native people and collecting their hair. There are documented cases of settlers massacring peaceful tribes, then scalping the dead to claim the bounty. Even during the Revolutionary War, both sides encouraged native allies to scalp enemies. And when settlers moved west, they brought that same mindset with them. The idea that scalping was uniquely native? That's a lie crafted in Hollywood and repeated in classrooms for generations. So which tribe scalped the most? Was it the Comanche, with their terrifying raids across Texas? The Apache, defending their lands against two nations? The Iroquois, driven by ritual and bounties? The truth is, there's no single answer because scalping wasn't about culture. It was about survival, about fear, about profit. Yes, the Comanche and Apache scalped frequently, but often it was in direct response to being hunted themselves. Scalping became a language of war in a land where mercy was rare. After the Indian Wars ended, America needed a villain. And the myth of the savage scalper was perfect. Western films, dime novels, and schoolbooks painted native tribes as barbaric. The Comanche and Apache were cast as monsters, the settlers, helpless victims. But history tells a different story. Scalping was learned, taught, paid for, and incentivized by Europeans first. And in the end, it spread to nearly every corner of the continent, staining every side of the fight. It wasn't native or European, it was human, and it was horrifying. Scalping wasn't some primal bloodlust. It was a survival tactic, an act of war, and sometimes a sacred rite. Yes, tribes like the Comanche, Apache, and Iroquois led the way in its use. But they weren't the only ones. And they weren't the ones who turned it into an industry. That was the colonists, the bounties, the governments who paid for pain. So next time someone mentions scalping, ask them which version they mean, the Hollywood version or the historical one, because the truth, it's far more complicated and far more important.